My name is Karim Martinez. I'm an Extension Family Life Specialist. And if you're not familiar with Extension, we do community outreach. So we have county extension offices throughout the state, and we provide community education related to family and consumer sciences, which is more about family health and wellness, but also 4-H youth development, agriculture, and horticulture. So what I was invited today to talk about is stress and resilience. And actually this presentation is part of a longer series that was developed in the Extension Family and Consumer Sciences Department. So I'm just going to be highlighting a few strategies. And if you all have ideas of other strategies that have worked for you, I definitely encourage you to share, because that's the great thing about groups like this, is that we can learn from each other and see what works, because the more tools that we have in the toolbox, the better. So the goal for today's presentation is to talk first about how stress affects our brains and body. We'll go through a few of the strategies, and then we can definitely throughout the presentation share our own experiences. I found this meme back in, I think it was like April of 2020, and I thought for sure by now that this meme wouldn't be relevant. So if you can't see, if you're on your phone, it's a picture from a Star Trek Next Generation. And it says, how it feels waking up every morning in 2020. And it's asking, what's the damage report? And so, January, 2021 has started out a little rough also. So I'm sure we're all feeling a lot of stressors still. And so just wanted to check in with all of you to see what are some stressors that you all are experiencing. Feel free to type in the chat if there's some examples of some of the stressors in your own life. And I know in speaking to colleagues and family and friends, a lot of us say we're stressed out, and what we talk about is that many times it's stress that we're experiencing that's different from anything that we've experienced in the past, or there's multiple stressors that maybe we didn't have in the past, so they're all piling up. So I see balancing work and personal life. That's a hard part, especially if everything's happening at home, right? Everything's going on in the same place. So much more to do and so little time to get it done. Yes. Upcoming high school registration for 2021 and 2022 school year. I think that I can't believe we're already talking about 2021-22, right? We're just barely getting into this year. Personal life, lots of stressors going on. Trying to get every student to come into class. Minimal student participation, worrying about everyone's safety, expectations, accountability. What stresses me is students not turning in assignments. Thank you for lifting that up, because we are all experiencing different levels of stress. And if it can let up a little bit, that is also very helpful, because then we can manage that a little bit more. So I'm seeing more things about balancing personal life and goals. Are there other things that maybe I'm missing?
I think a common one is also the stress of having the other adults in our home having to go out and work.
Well, I appreciate you all sharing. There's lots of stressors going on. And so the first step to building resilience when faced with all of these stressors in our lives is to understand how our brain and body responds to stress. So I have a very short video clip that's going to talk about what's going on in our brain when we're experiencing or having this stress response.
Humans, like all species, have self-protective mechanisms to help us survive. Our fight, flight, or freeze survival response, the FFF for short, is designed to mobilize our brain and body to fight an enemy, run from an avalanche, or freeze to hide from a predator. Our brain sometimes misinterprets safe situations as dangerous and can set off false alarms. When the amygdala, our brain's watchdog, senses and barks danger, our body enters survival mode quicker than our rational mind can react, leaving it trying to figure out why we feel in mortal danger. When the FFF alarm is sounded, we start to breathe more quickly and shallow, causing hyperventilation, and our heart starts beating very fast. These changes can cause strong chest pain, which many people interpret as symptoms of a heart attack, when in fact it's just a result of the FFF activation, which can be relieved through breathing exercises. As a way of getting you ready for action, blood is diverted towards the major muscle groups. Blood flows away from our digestive system, causing the bladder to relax, and we might feel the need to pee. The mouth goes dry, nausea can occur, and we get the butterflies feeling in our stomach. Blood also rushes from extremities, leaving us with cold hands, but often sweaty palms as the action-ready body starts sweating to avoid overheating. Legs and hands can start trembling and feel weak, while tension starts building in big muscles like the thighs, neck, and shoulders. In our head, FFF alarms cause our brain to focus on negative memories so it can scan them to avoid danger and negative outcomes. We get tunnel vision as our pupils dilate to increase our focus and long vision, but as a result, we lose our peripheral vision. FFF activation also reduces our ability to recognize differences in facial expressions. Too much oxygen and too little CO2 can result in dizziness or lightheadedness, which many people interpret as signs that they might faint. But because fainting is caused by a drastic drop in blood pressure, and because the FFF increases both our heart rate and blood pressure, it's nearly impossible to faint when this happens. Over time, depression, anxiety, and high levels of stress all harm the brain's ability to slow or cancel false FFF activations, causing them to happen more often. Knowing the symptoms of false activations makes it easier to recognize and reduce their effects.
And so the video actually talked about two types of stress. The first one that I wanted to highlight was survival stress, which is a response to a life-threatening situation. And so that's when our brain goes into survival mode and powerful chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol are released. So that's why our heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up. What we see is also glucose is released. So that's to help us fight or to run from danger. And so when we think about survival stress, this stress is good because it can help us survive a dangerous situation. But the problem is it's not meant to be activated all the time. And so you can see on this slide, it has some actual dangerous situations. And so the goal is to try to get us to react without thinking so that we can get out of that dangerous situation and live another day. So that really is what the stress response was designed for. Now, the second type of stress, so the video mentioned what was called the false FFF. Here we can call it the pseudo-survival stress. So pseudo-survival stress is when we have a stress response to a non-life-threatening situation. So some examples you can see on this slide might be, waiting in a long line at the grocery store, or, now in COVID times, maybe it means going to the store and the shelves are empty, or maybe it means your children are fighting with each other nonstop and you're trying to participate in a Zoom meeting. So the problem is that our brain can't really tell the difference between when something is an actual life-threatening situation or when it's a non-life-threatening situation. So either way, we're going to have that adrenaline and cortisol flooding our body. And again, it's not meant to be activated all the time because the flood of chemicals is harmful to us. So when we have those stress hormones or those stress chemicals flowing through our body, it can cause inflammation in our cells, it can cause damage to our cells. And that's why we see that chronic or ongoing stress is associated with a variety of different negative health outcomes. So when we have a lot of stress in our lives, that's why we're at higher risk for developing things like hypertension, obesity, cancer, diabetes. The list goes on and on of different health conditions that we can be more at risk for. And then on a side note, when our brain is in survival mode, it is harder to focus and learn. Remember, the idea is that you go into that survival mode to escape danger. And so your body is just reacting and it's trying to get you away without, so you're not using the rational part of your brain. What I've been seeing, and a really good explanation of this was, the same neural pathways that are used for stress are the same ones that are used for learning or for rational thinking. And so you may notice this in your students as well. It's a lot harder to focus when we're under a lot of stress. And that's because those neural pathways are being used for your stress response And so they're not being used for that cognition. And I don't know if any of you have experienced that, right? I know when I'm under a lot of stress, it's really hard for me to concentrate on and focus on things. Now, the good news is that not all stress is bad, and there are ways that we can make stress work for us instead of against us. So a third type of stress that I wanted to highlight is positive or adaptive stress. And so this is when there is a situation that's challenging, but it can lead to a positive result based on how we decide to respond. So when we think about our response to stressors, there is a small space where we can decide how we respond. And the way that we choose to respond determines if it's going to be a positive response or a negative stress response. Another way to think about this is you can think about positive stress as similar to growing or building a physical muscle. So, right, when we're strength training, we're intentionally straining our muscles to help them grow stronger. You know, maybe a little bit uncomfortable, especially if we haven't worked out in a while, but that strain or that stress does help the muscle grow bigger and stronger. So we can think of this as a strategy for building our emotional muscles as well. There might be some ways that we can adapt our response. So for example, if maybe there's somebody who pushes your buttons or who maybe irritates you really easily, and maybe you normally respond by getting very upset and yelling, you know, maybe you can choose a more patient way, and that actually works that patience muscle. You're working on that patience neural pathway to make it stronger. And the more that you practice that, the more likely you are to be able to react more patiently in other similar situations. The pictures on this slide just show that the way that we build physical muscles, we can also intentionally work on building emotional muscles. This slide just shows a few characteristics or emotions that we can work on building. So for example, you might decide that you want to work more on being more forgiving. And when we talk about being forgiving, it doesn't mean just being more forgiving of others, but also more forgiving of ourselves, especially in these challenging times. I know that in speaking with family and friends and even with colleagues, and I should say especially with colleagues, sometimes we are really hard on ourselves, and we, in these challenging times, aren't giving ourselves that grace or that forgiveness of, you know, we're just doing the best that we can. That might be something that you might want to work on. Another emotion that or characteristic that we might want to work on that has been shown to be very beneficial, and this is something that I'm working on, is increasing gratitude. When things are very stressful, it can be hard to find those things to feel grateful for. And you notice in that video, it talked about tunnel vision. Well, your brain gets trained to look for danger or the negative. A way to counteract that is to be intentional in looking for small blessings or small things that bring us joy. And that helps, again, build that neural pathway. And research is showing that the more that we can practice gratitude, even in challenging situations, it does help us increase happiness and reduce stress. Feel free to list in the chat any emotions or values or characteristics that you maybe have been working on during these stressful times or would like to. And this slide, it just goes more in depth into that positive result. It does require some discomfort so those are those challenging situations. It does require frequent use and then trying to get that desired response. Now, just like we were talking about the positive stress, the fourth type of stress is negative stress. And just like we can build positive emotional muscles, we can also build negative emotional muscles. And these are reactions that are not helpful to us or to those around us. And so the more we practice these, the stronger that neural pathway also becomes, and those reactions become more automatic. So again, it's whatever we're practicing, that just will become our automatic reaction. And these are just some examples of some characteristics or some emotions that maybe we might find ourselves experiencing more of, that maybe we want to think about changing. So, and I know that for me, when I'm very stressed out, things irritate me more easily, and so I am more easily angered. I know I get really stressed out and maybe I'm a little bit more unorganized, and so just thinking through, you know, what are the characteristics that we want to work on. And then a good reminder is it's not the situation that determines a positive or negative result. It's the response to the situation. So we'll talk a little bit more about that space between the stressor and the response. So this next section is where I'm going to highlight a few strategies for building resilience. And so when we're talking about resilience, what we're talking about is the ability to recover quickly from or adjust easily to difficulties, or the ability to become strong, healthy, or successful again after something bad happens. And this was a great quote that one of my colleagues found. You know, the world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong in all the broken places. So I think this is acknowledgement that things in life are very difficult and challenging, but there is still hope. At least that's how I see it, is that we can be stronger in the face of adversity. The first one I'd like to highlight, it's called defining your personal purpose. Sometimes you might hear this as finding your why. And the reason why this helps us become resilient is because when we know what's most important in our lives, it can help not only motivate us, but it can help keep us going, and it can help keep us from giving up even when there are difficulties. And it can help define who we want to be and how we want to live. So for example, if we're reacting to stress triggers in ways that maybe aren't aligned with our values or the person that we want to be, then we can decide on working on changing those reactions. I wanted to share another video, and some of you may have seen this. I've seen this in different presentations that I've attended, and this is called Know Your Why.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director? Yes, sir. All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, once you give me the version, as if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick. If you know which version I'm talking about, just see if that exists. Let me see what you got. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, see. Okay. Here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
I enjoy that video because I think it shows how impactful finding your purpose or your why can be. I don't know if anyone else in the group has seen that video before. So these are just a few questions, and we don't have time in today's session to go through this, but typically in a longer session, we'd have time to go through and answer and see what's most important in your life, what your values are, and that just helps center us and inspire us and keep us going in stressful times. And it can also help with, I think, determining, okay, if we're focusing on what's most important, then maybe we can let go of some of the things that are not as big a priority in our life. So it helps with making that decision because we can't do everything, right? We only have a certain amount of energy, of time, and so focusing on what's the most important can help with reducing that stress. So a second strategy, so that was the first one we'll talk about. Second strategy, and this one is called mindfulness, but the reason why this one is very powerful is because it actually addresses that stress response. So in that video, when we saw how our brains were really going into survival mode and flooding our bodies with all of the stress hormones, we can actually use mindfulness to start calming down that response. And probably the most powerful part of this is that it actually helps link your emotional brain and your rational brain so that you're not just reacting out of emotion. And this can be very powerful, especially in making that space. So we talked about how there's a space between the stressor and the response. And the more that we can practice mindfulness, the bigger that space gets. And when I talk about mindfulness, sometimes people think it means meditation, and it doesn't necessarily mean meditation. What it means is just to be fully aware in the present moment without judgment. And so the opposite of being mindful might be, I don't know if any of you have had this experience where maybe you're driving somewhere and you're thinking about everything, maybe things that you have to do tomorrow, or maybe you're worrying about things that happened at a meeting in the past. And so your mind isn't focused on your driving. And so you get to your destination and you have no idea how you got there. I don't know if any of you have had that experience. Another way of not being mindful might be maybe you're trying to have a conversation with somebody, but you're thinking about the emails you haven't responded to, or maybe, since this is a group of educators, maybe either lesson plans you haven't finished or about papers you haven't graded. And so you're so focused on that you don't know what the person that you're talking to actually told you. So those are just some examples of not being in the present, in the moment. I see some responses here that other people have had similar experiences. And so you can see in the slide, mindful versus mindful, right? So being in the present helps us reduce the anxiety because we're not worried about the future or the past. We're in the moment. And one of the ways that can help people is breathing. And so I'll show you, this is less than a minute long, and it's just a breathing exercise. You may have heard this called box breathing, but it's 4 seconds in, hold, 4 seconds out, hold. So just follow the directions that are in the bubble, and we can practice some mindfulness through breathing. That was actually less than a minute. So this is something that you can practice yourself. You can use with your family. You can use with your students. It doesn't have to be this video. There's lots of videos and apps that demonstrate breathing. I even saw Sesame Street has Elmo's belly breathe video. So if you work with little ones. So breathing is a very powerful technique. It doesn't work for everything or for everyone, but it is a good tool to have in your toolbox, and it can work with all age groups. So that's just a helpful hint. I've heard teachers saying that they're incorporating mindfulness just to get everyone sort of centered before starting a lesson. So another strategy is called challenging our mindset. And so when we think about mindset, it's our own perspective of how we see the world. And sometimes we think that the way that we see the world is the way things are. But an important aspect of our mindset is recognizing that it's based on our thoughts. It's not necessarily based in reality, right? So you can see this quote here. We simply assume that the way we see things is the way they really are or the way they should be. And our attitudes and behaviors grow out of these assumptions. Sometimes our mindset can work to help us, but sometimes it may not be helpful to us. And so we may need to be open to looking at our mindset and seeing if it can be changed and improved. And so what makes up our mindset? So it includes our attitudes, our beliefs, and our thoughts. And I like this saying right above it, don't believe everything you think. Again, sometimes we are our own worst critics, or, the way that we talk to ourselves or the way that we think about ourselves is not very helpful to us. But the good part is that we can challenge that and we can change it. So this just, again, reinforces that part of things, that our attitudes, so how we feel about things, and our beliefs, what we believe about things, and then those are part of our mindset. And make sure that your worst enemy doesn't live between your own two ears. That's just some ideas for mindset. And I think as we see more and more of us are feeling a lot of stress, that trying to reduce or calm down that stress response will help so much in learning, because then we can use our more rational side of our brain instead of just being in that survival mode all the time. Before I go on to this, rewrite your thoughts. So going back to the mindset, so there was one of my colleagues, again, she shared a story with me because she's the one who developed this presentation, and especially the challenging your mindset piece. And she used to do a lot of health and wellness trainings, and a really good example that she gave of how powerful mindset can be was she had a gentleman in her class who was quitting, or he had quit smoking. And so she asked him, what motivated you to quit smoking? And, she was like, was it the health warnings? What was it about smoking that finally made you change your mind to change this health behavior? And he said that what happened was his 5-year-old daughter told him one time, because he used to go outside to smoke, and he always valued spending time with his daughter, right? That was part of what was important to him. He valued spending time with his daughter and being a good father. And so one day his daughter told him, well, if you didn't have to go out and smoke, you could spend more time with me. And so that just really struck him, as what he valued and what he saw as most important was spending time with his daughter. And here his daughter had that comment, well, there's these times when you can't be with me because of this habit. And so that's actually what finally got him to decide to quit smoking. And so you can see how just a change in your mindset can actually have a big impact in your life. Okay, so going on to rewriting your thoughts. So again, this can be challenging because the way that our pattern of thoughts and the way, again, that we speak to ourselves, it happens over a long period of time. It's a habitual way of talking to ourselves. And so we can actually learn a strategy for rewriting our thoughts. So in terms of rewriting your thoughts, these are just some questions that you can ask yourself to assess and change maybe some of the habitual ways of thinking that we have. So is your thought aligned with your personal purpose? So in that example, the gentleman, he smoking and spending time away from his daughter didn't align with what he valued. Now, when we're thinking about thoughts, we also want to think about, would you be proud to share your thoughts with others? Is this a thought that you would have wanted your loved ones to have in this situation? Does this thought reflect the best version of you? And is this thought leading you to a positive result? So just thinking of now this situation that we're in, my colleagues and I, we've had to pivot to delivering programs online as opposed to in person. So, if a lot of you are educators, you've had that same experience. If you're parents or family members, you've had to pivot and rethink how school's delivered. And so there's a lot of skills that we weren't used to having to do. And so I know even with my coworkers, some of us would be having thoughts like, I'm just not good with technology. I'm dumb. I'm never going to learn this. And so we had to push ourselves to challenge our own mindsets and to think of, okay, well, I don't know how to use this yet, or I don't know how to do this yet, or I'll figure it out. And so it was challenging our mindset to think of, this is a skill that I can learn. And so just thinking about what are those thoughts that we're having, and in our everyday lives, how are we talking to ourselves? And if we're especially hard on ourselves, thinking through, is that something that I would say to a friend of mine or to a loved one? And so the takeaway from here is that we can control our thoughts, even though it doesn't feel like it sometimes. And we can actually be intentional about working to change some of those thoughts. And we can probably encourage the people around us to do the same. But again, it's just trying to be maybe more compassionate, caring, and kind, not only with ourselves, but with others. The last section of strategies I'd like to switch my focus more towards recovery. Sometimes we think about these strategies as self-care, and these are activities that reduce fatigue and replenish the mind and body. So just like muscles need to recover, we also need time to recover from stressful and challenging situations. In other words, our brain needs breaks just like our muscles do. And what we've really noticed is that there's just such a strong connection between the mind and body, right? So that's one thing that the pandemic has taught us is that mental health and physical health go hand in hand. And I found this meme on the right, and I thought it was particularly relevant for educators and families, because I think in both arenas, we tend to think that we can't ever take a break, that we have to keep going. But what this meme says, it's if you don't pick a day to relax, your body will pick it for you. And so sometimes I've heard this too, like as the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. Sometimes I've heard it as you have to put your own oxygen mask on before you put somebody else's on. And so we do have to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. And I know it's so difficult, especially, again, if you're taking care of someone, or if you're in a profession where you have to just keep giving and giving, it can be hard, but we do have to take that break, because if not, our bodies will tell us that we need to take that break. I don't know if anyone's had that experience where you just keep going and going and going, and then you just have to stop because your body, either you get sick or you just get so tired you have to take a break. So on this slide, it describes a few ways of recovering. And the idea for recovery is that one size doesn't fit all. So again, these are all just ideas to put into your toolbox and see what ends up working for you. But some low effort recovery activities might be watching television, listening to music, reading, relaxing. In terms of relaxation, we already talked about breathing, but some other things like meditation, yoga, nature. So now we're seeing a lot of research that shows that being out in nature really helps improve mental health. So there's, again, that strong connection between being outside and health and wellness. Napping, socialization, so with family, friends, and pets. And this could be a whole series or whole session in and of itself, is the importance of healthy relationships. And I know that sometimes with having to isolate, we're not having that same connection, but we can start to connect virtually. And I think that's why even in virtual settings, having that time to connect with others is being shown to be so important. There's physical activities that you can do. So here it lists sports, exercise, stretching, and eating. And one thing to note is that physical activity, that's one of the quickest ways to break that stress response. So if you are noticing yourself getting very stressed and you can tell that your heart rate is going up, you can actually stop that stress response by doing something that's involving movement, just getting up and dancing for a song, or just walking around, or just doing some kind of movement. And then being creative, so hobbies, art, music, imagination, and of course, anytime that we can incorporate humor and laughter, so anything that's fun. Again, all of these help with that recovery, with breaking that stress response. Yes, and socialization. Relationships and social connection are so important for well-being. And on this slide, it just talks a little bit more in depth on self-care. And we can't forget, again, that's such a strong connection between mental and emotional health and physical health. And so we want to take care to think about what we're eating. Here it says support self-control, better physical energy, less emotional swings, and helps with focus. And I'm sure some of you who, like, if you've ever skipped a meal, have you ever felt hangry? That's what what I've heard is, and then especially if I don't eat, small things will irritate me a lot more easily if I'm hungry. And exercise, again, one of the quickest ways to stop that stress response, but it also increases overall resilience. It reduces the risk of illness because it improves our immune system, helps to create new brain cells. And then sleep. And sleep can be very challenging, especially when we are feeling very stressed or anxious. But it is important to remember that sleep is the deepest form of recovery. So we do need to make sure that we're focusing enough attention in taking care of our sleep. And if we do have sleep challenges, we may need to talk to a healthcare provider just to make sure that there isn't, that we don't need maybe some additional assistance in making sure that we're getting enough sleep. So remember, we do need to take care of our basic needs, because with all of these, right, if I don't get enough sleep, if I'm not eating right, if I'm not exercising, I do notice that my stress level goes up even higher. And so these are all ideas of how we can make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, again, so that we can be the best support for others in our lives too. And then this slide is just talking about the strategies for this. So, finding ways to move throughout your day. And, I mentioned getting up and dancing. So that might be something that, like, if you enjoy dancing, that might be something that you can do. Eating frequently or having some healthy snacks available, that might be an easy way to make sure you're eating, even if you don't have time for a full meal, making sure that you're eating throughout the day. And then taking care of your sleep patterns. A common one for, I think, a lot of people just in this whole pandemic time too. It's a little bit harder to get some sleep. And so how about, what strategies are you planning to try? And so another stressor is just, and this may not be for us, but maybe for other people. So we want to make sure that we and also others around us have access to the resources that we need. Unfortunately, through this pandemic, there's so many families who maybe have lost jobs. There's not that source of income like there used to be. And so maybe the stress is financial, maybe the stress is related to access to food. There's lots of stressors. And so if we can find out resources that work for us or resources that work for others, we can be a help to others or also help our family. And so the state of New Mexico has some great resources. I also wanted to highlight the New Mexico Crisis Access Line, because I think one thing that we've learned again is that connection with physical health and mental health, and the recognition that when we have a physical illness, it's accepted and it's common to go see a healthcare provider to help us with maybe our physical illnesses. But sometimes we don't think about that for our emotional and mental health and wellness. And so sometimes we may need to speak to somebody to make sure that emotionally and mentally that we're well. The New Mexico Crisis Access Line, what I really appreciate about their website is that they're a great resource, and now they have a Connect app. So it's New Mexico Connect, and they also connect people to resources. So again, even like food pantries or information about employment or getting an employment insurance. I think that's another important part when we think about stress and resilience, is sort of helping each other out with what resources might be able to address whatever is causing the stress in our lives. So I think all of it is together. So not only is it how do we manage our own stress individually, but also how do we connect people to resources to maybe help alleviate some of the stressors. So I did also want to highlight some community resources. And so in closing, I just wanted to open it up to any questions, or if you have ideas of what has worked for you, or maybe your family members, or maybe your students, definitely welcome you to share, because I know I get lots of ideas when I give presentations. I get lots of ideas from you all. So here's my contact information, and I'll just see if anybody has questions or comments. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for inviting me to spend some time with you all.